محمودی هستم، پایه‌گذار اتحاد برای ایران و در برکلی زندگی میکنم. I think I was in 3rd or 4th grade when I started wearing camo pants and sleeping on the floor because not every kid had the privilege of having a bed. And my mom was extremely supportive of me and my ideas and whatever I wanted to do, and kind of supporting me in my vision of myself. And I always loved her for that. And I think I was in 4th grade when I declared that I don't want to go to school up the hill. I want to go to school in Dehevanak, with where the average individuals went. In summer of 2009, I was working at the UN, doing similar work to Healthcare Without Harm. And I was international coordinator to a project in 8 countries around environmental health issues. And like so many people around the world, both Iranian and global citizens, I was so taken back by what happened in Iran, both the bravery and the dignity of my brothers and sisters, and by the backlash the government showed, the violence. And I was completely heartbroken. And I felt that I had to do something. I always have crazy ideas. So I went to my husband and I'm like, honey, I got an idea. He was like, okay, what now? I'm like, I'm going to organize a big global day of action for Iran. And people are having rallies everywhere, but I don't think it's being as organized as it could be, and the messaging isn't tight. I think I want to do this. And summer vacation was coming up, so we had 2 weeks off. And I took an extra 3rd week off, so I had 3 weeks. So I reverse engineered. I'm like, okay, so the last day can be July 25th. Let's pick that Saturday. And I said, that's it, July 25th. We're going to do a big global day of action. And at that time, I'd done environmental work and I'd done activism, but I'd never worked on Iran, short of one exception. And I had never worked on human rights or anything like that. It was true grassroots movement, like it was classic. So people would hear it from another city and contact me, and then we would have it. And we wanted to name the day Global Day of Action. And the volunteer who was putting our website together, buying the domain name, said, well, really, that's a boring name. And I asked him, like, well, do you have a better name? You know, he said, let me think about it. I'll come back to you tomorrow. And he came back. He's like, how's United4Iran? I'm like, that's not bad. That's good. So within 3 weeks, we got 110 cities. Desmond Tutu made videos. 7 other Nobel laureates were involved. Maz Jobrani and Reza Aslan made videos sponsoring the day. U2's manager contacted us to see if we could give him pictures to project on the wall for Sunday Bloody Sunday during their concert. And we're like, of course, we'll find some pictures. So yeah, it became, in retrospect, I found out, the biggest day in solidarity for people of Iran in history. So after that, I quit my job at the UN, or transitioned out, and decided to start United4Iran.
Can't believe the news today. I can't close my eyes, make it go away.
My parents got married in Tehran, Iran, and quickly moved to the US and lived in San Francisco Bay Area, and had my sister and I pretty much back to back. I was born in March of 1971, and shortly after my sister was born, who was born 17 months after me, my parents decided that would be best for my mom and us to move back to Iran, so my dad could get more settled, and then for us to move back. Well, it turned out that we moved back and stayed in Iran. My parents got divorced when I was 4 years old, and we moved into my grandparents' house in Shahr Ziba and had a small little room that we were perfectly happy with for years. And around the time of the revolution, maybe a year before, we moved to the Boluk next door, Boluk 17 رفتیم از 16, and stayed there for about a year. And then when the revolution happened, things changed a lot, obviously. And I was very affected by the change, the possibility that people can advocate for change and sea of people go in the streets and see change happen. And I was also influenced by my mother, who at the time was Tudei, and a lot of my childhood was sitting around in awe, listening to her and her friends who all had big mustaches and jeans and cigarettes and talking. And so I was very much engrossed in that. Shortly after the revolution, the war started, and my dad came back to Iran. And since we were born in the US, he came with 2 American passports for my sister and I, and talked to our mom about moving us to the US, back to the US. And until then, I loved my dad dearly, and I saw him only a few times a year when he came to visit with really fancy American clothes and toys. My mom was pretty heartbroken, as you can imagine, single mother whose whole life has been these 2 kids, letting go of that. But she agreed. And in 1983, we moved to Burlingame, and I was 12 years old then. And my junior high and high school years were pretty difficult years in the sense that in Iran I felt very engaged and had a sense of purpose. And when I moved to the US, I kind of lost that. It was a period where I felt like I was frozen a little bit. I wasn't fully engaged in school. I really didn't have a lot of friends that I could connect with. So those years were a bit challenging. And it took me a little while to find my grounds again. But I went to UC Berkeley, applied to UC Berkeley, and moved to Berkeley when I was 18. And there, kind of little by little, I kind of assimilated more to the US. And I pretty much supported myself. I worked at the coffee shop called the Coffee Source back then, and did different various jobs. Lot of I waitress, I did work study and continued my studies. When I turned 21, I was able to apply for a green card from my mother. And so she came to the US right as I turned 22. And I had these plans that I wanted to move to Guatemala. So put that on hold and lived with my mom for a few years. And our roles had reversed a bit, which I think a lot of us who have had families move here with their older parents and had to assimilate more quickly than their parents have had this experience. So my sister decided to go to graduate school when she didn't get into med school. And so I gave her my full blessings to move on, and she got into Harvard for graduate school. And so it was my mom and I for a while. And I worked at Saul's restaurant and supported her for a few years. And then she passed her nursing test again and moved to Reno, where although her English was limited, she could get a job as a nurse. And once she did that, I decided to explore what else I was going to do. So I decided to go to graduate school. I chose a double master's program at School of Public and Environmental Affairs in Bloomington, Indiana, where I could study both Master of Science and Environmental Science, so get the science and the technology behind all of the environmental work that needs to be done, and the policy portion. So I studied both of those for a few years, and that school felt much better. It took me a little while to get my first job, not that long, and I wasn't deeply happy with that job. It was a consulting firm, really nice folks, but it just didn't feel right. So after I transitioned out of that job, I kind of learned a big life lesson that it's really critical what you do, and whatever you do that you connect with it. So I decided to go back to the place I used to waitress years back at UC Berkeley and just stay there as long as it took to get the right position. So it took me 10 months. And I had 2 masters and $50,000 in debt, but I gave it the time that it took. I just was adamant about that. Eventually, I found a position, a person that I found very inspiring. And I essentially went to her, I'm like, look, I want to work for you, and if you don't have money, it's fine. I'm just going to take this position and just work and look for other work too, because I need to get by. But in the meantime, I'm just going to do this work. And I just kind of went in and declared this to this wonderful environmental activist, Annie Leonard, who now runs Greenpeace USA. And she called a few people we had in common, made sure I wasn't a complete crazy person who's just walked into her office. And she's like, fine, come volunteer. And I think it took 6 weeks before she hired me. I really worked hard and did everything I could to impress upon her that I really wanted to do the job and I could do it. But it was very clear that I had that purpose. Kind of went back to when I was a kid and I felt that purpose. And for me, the purpose was doing something that was bigger than me, and it was of service to others. The organization that I worked at was called Healthcare Without Harm, and essentially was started by a group of environmental activists, and from doctors and nurses to straight up environmental activists who wanted to improve environmental health around the world. So I was one of the 2 international coordinators and focus in Southeast Asia, Middle East, Africa, Latin America on working with local communities and groups, supporting them and being able to advocate for healthier lives, not only for the affluent, but people in poor areas too. So it was environmental health as well as environmental justice. Right around the time that I got that job, my mom always says things happen for a reason. Right around that time, in the same office, there was another organization called Rockwood Leadership Training and Program. And they did leadership training for essentially social change workers, and they still do. So the person who founded and started that organization was in that office, and after a little while we started dating, and then he's my husband. So when I met him, his twin boys were 3 years old. They were almost 3, and now they're 16. And we have a boy who's also 8, so lots of boys. And they're joys of my life. And and my idea of family is very old school, if you will. A lot of folks who come and visit me and see where I live often say, oh my God, this is exactly how it used to be in Iran. I'm lucky enough to share a backyard with 4 other families. 2 of them are families that my husband went to high school with one of the family members, the men of the house. And my sister lives next door, and my mom lives a block away, and we have another 4 or 5 families within a few blocks. And everybody a lot of folks work on environmental issues or anything for social change, and except my sister and her husband who are doctors. I think with regards to rights and opportunities, I think there are still a vast number of issues that face women. I think a lot has changed, and when I think about any kind of social change, I try to step back and look at it with at least one generation in mind. That's how we can keep going and see our impact. And so yes, things are very different than they were 100 years ago around the world, and in Iran in particular. And we have a long way to go. Women in Iran not eligible to be president. The rate of unemployment for women in Iran is twice that of men, although there are more college graduates that are women. There's deep discrimination. There's discrimination with family law, with marriage rights, at so many levels against women, not only in Iran, but in the US and around the world as well. The problem is fairly simple. There's no equality. Equality is not there yet, and we need to work towards that. So the question becomes, how do we do that? So keeping in mind that change takes a long time, and being persistent and keeping at it, I think is critical. I think working together is really important. I think when we think about change, we can't work with people we like. We have to work with everyone. And that may include someone that we don't get along with, or people we have very little in common with. And that needs to include all women. I think if we want to see a world without sexism, we need to not only include women who are educated and live in northern Tehran, who are affluent, but it has to include people who haven't gone to school, has to include people who are in the rural areas. The first step for men is to educate themselves, to realize that they are benefiting from the sexism in the world. It's a they're privileged and they're benefiting from that, and deeply understand that and educate themselves. And then doing something about it. And that can look very simple and small to begin with. We all have a duty to do what we can to make the world a just place. For us as women to get where we want to get in society, be very clear about what we want. We need to visualize what we want. We need to talk about what we want and articulate it, share with each other, and build on that and strengthen our voice. I think that's an important first step. And I think we need to keep at it. We need to work hard, and we need to continue working hard. I think we need to keep in mind that real change is hard. It takes decades, and we need to step back to see the improvements, but work day to day towards that.